Okay, I'm Gary Houchins. I'm the chair of this committee. It's my pleasure to call to order the committee meeting for curriculum instruction and assessment. We have board members and committee members Laura Timberlake, Kathy Gornick, and Tracy Cusick here. Vice chair of this committee, Elisa Johnson, couldn't be with us today. We have four items here. I believe all are action items, which will require lots of committee participation to get our motions and seconds going to take care of our business. Our first item here is the voluntary certification of non-public schools. Presenter includes Associate Commissioner Kelly Foster, and she can introduce her other staff members.
Great, thanks. Good afternoon. I have with me today, I'm going to try to get this right, Mr. Coplier.
Good.
Okay, and he is here with us from the Kentucky Non-Public Schools Commission, and this is Neil, who is one of the branch managers in my office that deals with this program, and we partner with the Non-Public Schools Commission. And just to give you guys a little bit of history, we come to the board every June. Neil Watts, I'm sorry, Neil. We come to the board every June with this staff note to you all, and basically the Kentucky Non-Public Schools Commission is coming to you all saying that these schools, we're bringing 39 in front of you, have successfully completed the voluntary accreditation process, and the Kentucky Board of Education first approved this process in 1992 and then revisited that again in 2006. And so that agreement was done before all of our times, but then he brings to us the list of the schools and for how long they are recommending the recommendation for them to be certified. And you can see in the staff note, it ranges anywhere from, I believe, a year to 5 years.
5 years max.
And if you want to speak to a little bit about that, why some are 1 year, some are 5 years, I think that would be a great point to start off with.
Sure. Just a little bit of history. You can bear with me for a minute. 1985 is when schools began to have the option of being in voluntary compliance with state standards. Non-public schools were no longer forced to meet state guidelines, so voluntary compliance came into being in 1995. With the Kentucky Education Reform Act of 1991, the language removed reference to anything but the common schools. So starting in 1991, we already had a relationship with KDE, a good relationship starting in 1985. After 1991, we developed a process by which willing non-public schools that wished to conform to standards, that wished to avail themselves of things like KHSA sports, Kentucky Teacher Intern Program, loan forgiveness programs, those schools had an avenue by which they could be officially recognized by the state. So that's how the Kentucky Non-Public Schools Commission came into being in 1993. The state was no longer overseeing these non-public schools. The state sanctions the Non-Public Schools Commission to do the vetting and to bring these recommendations to the board. So that's what we've done every year since 1993. In terms of the schools that we brought to you today and that we will bring annually every June, sometimes we'll have a recommendation for 1 year. In those cases, it can be a couple of things. It can be a school that is continuing accreditation, but for whatever reason they had a hang-up. They had some school construction, they had a change of principal, whatever the case was, we allowed them to delay their self-study and their site visit for a year. So in that case, we put them down for a year. We'll come back with that same school next year and ask for 4 more years from you for that 5-year block that we're dealing with. Other schools are new applicants, and maybe there is some minor thing that we need to see taken care of within that 1 year time frame, as opposed to waiting 5 years. So we'll give them the year, and again, we'll come back to you next year with a recommendation for 4 additional years. So that's why you have some of the 4-year recommendations. Most of them are going to be 5. 5 is as deep as we tend to go. There are different accrediting groups that were vetted. There was a larger group vetted initially by KDE and then KBE in 1993, and then there was a secondary smaller group that was vetted and approved in 1997. And those are the groups that exist today, the same groups. That's why you see the different recommendations coming from different groups. That's an explanation of the years. Were there any questions?
Questions from board members?
Oh, I'm wondering about the accreditation.
Mhm.
Like, what other involvement does KDE have? And why is it necessary to I mean, to go through this process? Why could it not be in perpetuity, I guess, is my question.
I can answer that
Sure.
from just a school administrator point,
Sure,
and then you
sure.
can chime in. Because a lot of times in schools, leadership changes, boards change, different things that would happen. So just thinking about the schools, that I have worked with over the last 22 years, yes, I'm counting, getting ready to start year 23. But, things change, that maybe you had a certain leadership team in place and they were really hitting the standards and using their money for the right resources and making sure the kids that were behind were getting the interventions they need. And then, that leadership may change and there may not be sustainable systems. And so if we didn't look at this in a 5-year period, then, you're not.
So you do an assessment.
Well, they do.
Or-
They do, and they bring
Well,
that
that's just
recommendation
it.
to us.
The KDE does not have direct involvement with the administration of these
Because it's
schools, with the funding of
voluntary.
these schools. So this is a fail-safe.
Mhm.
So every 5 years,
From your perspective.
and from theirs,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I would say accreditation is important to these individual schools
Yes.
for their credibility, for the way they present themselves to their client families. Many of them are accredited through their denomination-specific organizations and so forth, which is how they ultimately receive accreditation from the
Right.
Non-Public Schools
Right.
Commission. So it's a value to them to have state accreditation as well.
So I guess my question is more like, if there were other ways that they were evaluated, like we might do with a regular government school, who are ongoingly accredited almost implicitly, and they come under scrutiny when, certain results coming back aren't up to snuff. So, and I didn't know, but if this is something you like, then you go for it.
Well, I think based on the language of the Kentucky Education Reform Act as of 1991, that wasn't really an option.
It wasn't?
It was,
Okay.
the state was taking a complete hands-off attitude to non-public schools. And so this was a means of getting those willing non-public schools who wanted to participate and wanted the state recognition, getting them back in the game.
I see.
Now, as far as today, that would be a question for the attorneys. Based on the law as it stands right now, is that something that the state could get into if it wanted to again? Because my understanding as of 1991 was, based on the language at that time of CARA, that was not possible.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I understand there are about 73,000 students who attend non-public schools in the state of Kentucky,
There's a
something
bunch.
like that. Yeah, so, while this board doesn't have direct authority over any of those schools, we're grateful for the work that you do. We recognize that those schools provide a public service and are serving students in a way that contributes to the public good of the Commonwealth, and so we're grateful for that.
Well, thank you for saying that. I mean, we feel the same way. We're glad that there's an avenue to be able to do this, to be able to come and voluntarily comply, as opposed to, well, you're not a public school and you just can't participate.
So we'll need a motion and a second to approve this voluntary certification of non-public schools.
So moved.
One second.
Second from Kathy. Okay, any further discussion on this? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Next up, we have Associate Commissioner. Next up, we have Associate Commissioner Amanda Ellis and Bill Buchanan. They are seeking approval of the preschool grant allotment for 2018 and 2019.
Yeah, so good afternoon. This is what we do every June. And so basically, we need approval for the future, for the upcoming year's preschool funding rates. Just as a reminder, our preschool is not universal. It is, you have to qualify. So It can be a disability or at 160% of the poverty level. So you have to qualify to be a part of that. And so we do have a child count that we do in December and in March to determine enrollment for the year, to determine how we set for the funding. And so I'm actually going to turn over to Bill because he does a phenomenal job of walking through this, because it seems a little confusing because it's based on last year's kids with how we fund for the future for this upcoming year. And that's the confusing part. So Bill, I'll just let you walk through it.
Okay. Well, thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to share the preschool funding formula with you and walk through how it works, say a little bit about the formula, and help with any questions that you may have about the next steps with the preschool funding formula. It's based on an average of the number of children served December 1 and March 1. And then what we do is that we take a sum of that average and multiply that by the per child rates. We have a flat rate for at-risk students. That's up to 160% of federal poverty level. Speech, which is children with disabilities, and children with disabilities with developmental delays. And then we have a weighted average for severe disabilities. And on page 2, I believe, of the staff note, we sort of provide an overview of what this looks like. So when the department receives funds, what do we do with it? So we run it through the formula I mentioned, and this is what it looks like. You take each of the categories, you find the average student enrollment, preschool enrollment, for December and March, right? Multiply that by the rate. Those rates, that's what we're asking for approval today. It generates amounts, including a total amount. The second chart below that explains or illustrates what a district would do once it receives its allocation. And that is, it can use the funds for allowable purposes, and those purposes would include things like salary, benefits, and print and travel. Those are just examples. But as you can see, there are lots of activities beyond what our state fund provides that are necessary for providing high quality services. So often school districts have to use other funds. They use local money, federal funds, and when non-eligible students are served, they may use tuition dollars as well to support high quality services. Clearly it's not enough. So what we emphasize is the importance of public-private partnership to ensure high-quality services are provided. And with the legislature renewal of the partnership grants, we will have new opportunities for school districts to apply for funds moving into the new school year.
And if you look onto the next page, just real briefly, you will see that we did have an increase. You can see the students served, and actually, if you'll go one more down, there we go. You can see where we increased nearly 2,000 students, which is a great thing. The only thing that is sometimes a little frustrating with that is that when the number of students increase, then you have less money per child for the next year, especially when the budget also did reduce the amount for preschool funding in the upcoming biennium. So it is quite a bit lower. If you look actually on the next chart, and Susan, if you can roll that to the next page, you'll see where our funding rates have changed and dropped. From last year to this year, it's pretty significant per child. You'll see that the increase in 15-16, and why did that increase so much, is when the governor allocated $18 million, am I right on that?
That's right.
$18 million for preschool to incentivize increased enrollment. For that, it did not really increase enrollment, but it was the good faith effort to give additional funding for preschool. With our former governor, he was a really big advocate for early childhood. And then that only lasted for a year, because then the biennium that began the next year gave the money, took that 18 million, actually took 15 of it and put it into public-private partnership grants, which is what we've done the past 2 years, and we just got the funding, as Bill had just said, for the next 2 years to promote partnerships to increase quality care in childcare settings and to open up more spaces for students to receive high quality services. So it's a little bit different, kind of weird, because you see the old numbers, we know it's for the funding for this year, but that's why we're coming to you to ask for approved funding amounts. What questions do you have?
In terms of the schools that actually will qualify for receiving these funds per se, is that only those that are quote unquote like Head Start type or
No, do
totally
you want to
separate?
speak to that?
Right, so the intent of
It's
the
a good
funds is
question.
to incentivize public-private partnerships to provide full-day, high-quality services to serve CCAP, Child Care Assistance Program, eligible preschool students.
Mhm.
So we're encouraging school districts to partner with childcare. But in some cases, there may be limited number of childcare providers. So they may, in some cases, partner with Head Start. In other cases, they may create a early childhood center.
Mhm.
Again, if child care doesn't exist, it's a way of, again, incentivizing quality, and that's the intent. So it's not necessarily Head Start, but it could be. It really
Mhm.
depends
Depending upon the
on.
district.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
Mhm.
Makes sense. Thank you.
There are no other questions. Do we have a motion? Second. Motion from Tracy.
1 second.
Second from Mark. Thank you. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Great.
Amanda Bill will stick around now for a second reading on a new regulation. This is 704 KAR 3015, the Kentucky All-Stars for preschool programs. I think we had first reading on this maybe some months ago, and now we're ready with the final regulation based on the revisions that were made.
That's right, and I'll turn it over to Bill to hit any highlight changes, but basically, in 2015, we had House Bill 234 that established mandatory participation requirements for public preschool programs in quality-based graduated early childhood rating system, which is the All-Stars system. And so, actually, I'll just turn it over to Bill to talk about the tiered quality rating, and
sure.
we'll just hit the highlights on that.
You heard earlier about stars and creating a stars. Well, in early childhood, there's a star system too. There was an existing voluntary star system, and that was revised to create Kentucky All-Stars, with mandatory participation by child care, any child care, state-funded preschool program, or Head Start receiving public funds. Early childhood providers receiving public funds must participate in this quality rating improvement system. So the system itself is designed to improve the quality as well as access to quality in early childhood settings. And in 2015, we had a pilot study conducted by UK to determine the impact on publicly funded early childhood providers. And then the Governor's Office of Early Childhood has contracted with Compass to complete a validation study, which may impact some of the weights in the way in which we evaluate programs moving forward. So, as Amanda said, is that there is a requirement for mandatory participation by public-funded preschool programs in Kentucky All-Stars. And so it's the reading, you had mentioned that it's been a few months since the first reading. So a couple things happened between, I think it was in February when we had the first reading of the regulation. There was passage of Senate Bill 96 during the 2018 legislative session. It clarified roles for promulgating regulations for the department and for the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. Initially, the Cabinet was authorized to promulgate regulation or regulations for participation in the system. So Senate Bill 96 clarified that and established authority for the department to promulgate regulations, and so we're able to move forward. Also, in April, Cabinet for Health and Family Services filed an emergency regulation for Kentucky All-Stars, and that's the changes that resulted in some of the changes that we've made to share with you now for the second reading is alignment to that particular regulation, right, to ensure that we have one unified system, that anything that we expect of childcare we'll expect of state-funded preschool in terms of what quality means.
Did I hear you say public-private partnership earlier? I mean, you were working with existing daycares. So how do they, as private folks, feel about a mandatory regulation, and where is this all heading anyway?
Do you want to touch base on the?
Right. I mean, I'm unsure I can speak for all child care programs, but those receiving public funds, I think it's an opportunity for them. It's to demonstrate the quality that they're providing, that's something I think we would want to be transparent about for families to know that the center that their child participate in is a high quality center.
So
And-
those who don't have these, I mean, I'm just
If it's-
thinking that there are, organizations that offer daycare that don't have mandatory, and they seem like they compete and do fine in the marketplace, so I'm just,
And that's up to them, and they don't have to, they can volunteer to participate in the STARS program. And they can, and if they pair up with the public preschool, or like our state-funded preschool, many times that's where they share a teacher to increase their STAR quality rating anyway, with having a certified teacher and the appropriate setting and environment and materials. And so it really increases sometimes the quality even of the private daycare, which is sometimes why they team up to increase
Okay.
their spots in their
so
quality as
the
well.
qualifications are still the same, though, 160% and all of that?
For state-funded preschool, yes, and for students who qualify for the CCAP dollars. So it would be your at-risk populations.
And CCAP has additional criteria too. I think there's work or education requirements for parents. So, but that's a funding opportunity. We administrate through the department to encourage, again, those partnerships between child care and public schools. So,
Okay. Any other questions on this one?
Thank you.
All right. You guys good to go?
good to
I
go
think
unless
this
you.
is a second read.
This is the
That's
second read, and
So,
very few sections, a couple of sections that were updated since the first read, if you'd
Okay.
like. They're highlighted there. The first section, we made a change to the definition of environmental observation, clarifying it's actually an assessment, as well as made that link to child care's regulation. No change to section 2. Section 3, there was a change made, again, in alignment to the child care regulation, as well as clarification that each site must complete an environmental assessment. No changes to sections 4 or 5, 6 or 7. And then section 8, we clarified the appeals process so that there's not an automatic call for a hearing if there are concerns about a particular center's rating, or if that rating is revoked. There's not an automatic appeal for that. Rather, there's some steps that have to occur locally. The commissioner would have an opportunity to review that and then issue an opinion before it would then go to administrative hearing.
I have a question. As far as dollars being allocated, how does it compare to the federally funded dollars? For instance, Head Start, when do those funds get appropriated to this? And then when do the funds that we are voting upon today get allocated towards the programs? Are they the same time? Is all money
There's
dispersed?
different schedules. So we're on a state-funded schedule. Head Start is on a federal schedule, and with this state-funded preschool programs, we allocate the funds straight from the department. Federally, it's federal to local in terms of the allocation of the funds.
But do you know ahead of time how many what your dollar amount is going to be that's coming from Head Start?
They don't have a
Sure.
reporting requirement to us. I mean, we can get that information for you if you're interested, but there's no reporting mechanism
So
for
you
Head
really
Start
don't know
to.
what the income is?
We don't know what
That's-
the, right, that's
That's
between
what
the
I'm
For Head
local,
Start, for
Okay.
right,
Head
that's
Start.
between the local
I
and
think
the,
that-
yeah.
okay. Thank you for the clarification. I was just trying to figure
Yeah.
that out, where,
Right,
what kind of.
good question.
Sure, it is a good question.
And finally, we conclude with the timeline, next steps, with approval of the second reading. That will set up the process for public hearing next month, followed by appearance before ours, And we hope to have this regulation adopted by August or September. And this just speaks to the current levels of quality. I actually have an update, I think, from this slide. We have currently about 500, a little over 505 sites, state-funded, receiving state-funded preschool. 441 are 5-star, 6 are 4-star, and 58 are 3-star. But this just kind of shows a breakout. In this instance, it's just showing high quality 3, 4, or 5 stars by region.
Okay. Anything else on the All-Stars regulation? Okay, if not, we'll need a motion. Second.
So moved.
Thank you, Laura. Second.
Good.
Second from Tracy. Thank you. Any other discussion on this? If not, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you. And we will keep Amanda around for one more.
Just keep hanging at the table, guys. Thank you, Bill.
Or Ashley Lant is here in Todd's place.
Did you want anything open from? No. I think we're good. I think it's an overview. So this is the second read for 704 KAR 3306, which is the Kentucky Academic Standards for Historical and Cultural Influences of the Bible elective social studies course.
It's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. Just as a reminder, this was put in place in 2017 by our General Assembly for House Bill 128, which required the department to create standards for this specific purpose of an elective. It is not required, but we were charged with writing the standards. So this is a second read. We had great feedback on the first read, and so now we're back with the second to show you changes that we've made to that, so we're able to hopefully fulfill what you all expected of that and give you an update on how we got input and move forward. So I'm actually going to turn it to Jennifer.
Yeah, so based on the feedback that we received when we reported to you all or presented to you in April, we reconvened some focus groups that consisted of high school teachers as well as higher ed to really look at the intent behind HB 128 and what we had done with the standards. And so what they concluded was there was some room for some tighter alignment to the reg. And so just some slight changes. Last time we talked about the architecture, so I'll just focus on the changes this time around historical thinking especially. Really changing from thinking about influence to interplay. I think we talked about that last time, just to really highlight the relationship, but then also making the change from the Bible and other religions text to biblical text. And truly, those are the big changes that were that looked at through the focus groups. We then reconvened the writing committee, and everyone was very supportive of what the changes were. So I think that's pretty much it. What questions can we answer about the process or the standards themselves? Again, the framework really around the three strands was to push on the academic study of the Bible.
That's right.
Yes.
I really appreciate the work the committee has done on this.
Yeah.
This is a course that schools could have taught in the past.
Absolutely.
But
That's
with
right.
this bill, it gave a framework for schools to be able to do it in a way, and especially with state standards, that makes it more unified across the
Right.
state, and I
Yeah.
think preserves the integrity of the course as an academic approach to the Bible. So
Absolutely.
really grateful for all the work that went into it.
We appreciate the feedback. It was very helpful and a guided conversation, so that was good.
Good. All right. Any other discussion on this one? Okay, so we will need, again, a motion and a second to approve 704 KAR 3306, Academic Standards for Historical and Cultural Influences of the Bible. Kathy moves.
I'll second.
Second from Laura, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And the motion passes.
Thank
very
you, guys.
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for all your work.
Absolutely.
And now I'll just need one more motion to adjourn the meeting.
She says
Laura's hands up, that's going to take that as a motion.